Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought we'd have a look at the suggestions past the developers for June of 2022, and in this video have a look at the aviation portion to see what is going on with it. Obviously there's a bunch of stuff that got passed, and a lot of it is pretty interesting, so hopefully you enjoy it as much as I do. The first vehicle is American, and it is the F8F2 Bearcat. This one is just an upgrade of the F8F1. The basic additions are a more powerful engine, and also redesigning the engine cowling for that engine, and then also 420mm cannons, very similar to the F8F1B. It also has a new tail and a rudder on it, and it makes it look like an absolutely beautiful aircraft. It's designed a general purpose aircraft for taking down enemy air targets, whilst also being able to carry bombs and rockets for ground strike missions. And also, it was designed for catapulting and for carrier landings. The prototype on it first flew in the 1st of September 1949, and overall wasn't a huge success since a bunch of other planes were coming around at that time, including the jet age, which kind of took over the general area. The power plant that this uses is a Pratt & Whitney R2830W radial engine with access to a one-stage supercharger. I could see this as an event or a battle pass, or maybe even just a standard premium vehicle. It will be very similar to the F8F1B, which we already have in the game, just a little bit more powerful engine. The British get the Fairey Hendon, which is one of the OG pencil bombers developed in Britain during the 1930s, which eventually went into some other pretty interesting designs, such as the Whitworth Whitley, which hopefully at some point we get in the game. The Fairey Hendon is the first and only heavy bomber which was made by the Fairey Aviation Company. It was also the first RAF plane with a complete metal structure. The plane was designed in 1927 to meet a new night bomber specification issued by the RAF on the 17th of August 1927. This required a range of 920 miles with an average speed of 115 miles per hour and a load of 1,500 pounds. Although the winner of the requirement was actually the Handley Page Hayford, an order for 14 Hendon was received by Fairey. Designed and built at the Hayes factory, the Hendon prototype featured a number of new innovations for the time: an internal stowage for the bomb load, designed to accommodate one of the new 1,000-pound bombs in the total possible load of 1,660 pounds, a catwalk between the tail and the nose gunner's positions, so that all crew members were free to move from one end to the other of the plane while in flight. And also, if extra fuel tanks were carried instead of bombs, the plane had a range sufficient to fly to India in 3 non-stop stages. The prototype first flew on November of 1930, powered by 2 525-horsepower Bristol Jupiter XF 9-cylinder radial engines, and featuring an open tandem cockpit for the pilot and a radio operator. The cockpit was redesigned and closed for the production version of the plane. With the first prototype in flight in 1934, with the second cockpit fed over, you can kind of see it in this picture, what it would generally look like. After the Air Ministry's order of 14 aircraft in 1934, the production started with some new engines. The 695 horsepower fully supercharged Kestrel 6 inline engines and various other improvements, like a rotating front turret. Only 2 of all the Hendons ever produced were lost in accidents, the last one being worth of noting, which was on 1938, and a dual-control Hendon was crashed on an unauthorized takeoff at night by 2 pilots in Marham. Shortly after taking off, the second pilot, presumably drunk, closed the throttle, causing the plane to stall and crash into the ground. The 2 men were not hurt, but faced a court-martial and a 1-year detention. So, pretty interesting at the end of the day. In addition to the 1,660-pound bomb load, it was also protected by 3 7.7 Lewis machine guns. The Japanese get a maritime patrol aircraft which could be kitted out with some munitions. This is the P-3C Orion, the anti-submarine patrol aircraft. The P3 was developed by Lockheed to be the successor of the P2V, and the JMSDF started to select next-gen anti-sub-patrol aircraft to replace their P2V7s and P2Js and also PXLs. At first, they planned to build an original MPA that was made in Japan, and especially Kawasaki actually built a mock-up of their plan, the GK520, and Shinmeiwa proposed the PS1 Kai, which was a ground version of the PS1 with the TF-34. But in that time, the defense agency unfortunately lacked enough technology to build that type of aircraft in Japan. For example, 26% of the PS1 was lost in a crash and 37 of its crew died. And the Ministry of Finance claimed to import some new ideas. In October of 1927, the new Prime Minister of Japan, Tanaka, cancelled the project of the PXL that was made in Japan and started to select aircraft to import in 1975. And in 1976, Lockheed, there was a bunch of bribery scandals appeared, and the selection was kind of stopped. But in 1977, the Japanese decided to adopt the P3C. There was 3 planes which were imported from the US in 1981 with the FMS. And in 1982, Kawasaki assembled some kits which were basically build-up parts from it, and then started to license produce the machine. Eventually, Kawasaki had 107 P3Cs for the JMSDF. During the Cold War, the JMSDF operated about 100 of these to patrol around Japan, but after the end of the Cold War, a number decreased to about 80 planes, and 5 were modified into the OP-3C. Also during 1991 to 1998, 5 planes were modified to the EP-3, and in 1991, 1 plane was modified to the UP-3C. And during 1998 to 2000, 3 were modified to the UP-3D. Just to give you kind of an idea of the different variants that were going around. Now, what is interesting about this vehicle is it's very slow and very big, can't really actually defend itself, but does have some pretty crazy weaponry. So it has a bunch of anti-submarine guided torpedoes, the Type 12, 97, and Mark 46. It can carry depth charges. It can carry Zuni rockets, the 127mm. It can also carry AGM-65 Mavericks and also the AGM-84 Harpoons. But I do want to stress this is actually the AGM-65 Maverick, which is the anti-ship one. It isn't the standard ones that we've seen when it comes to the game. I believe it's actually the G model, if I remember correctly. Oh no, sorry, it's the F model. The F model one, which was designed specially for the US N at the time. But basically, it's a modified D model with an infrared guidance system, which is optimized for tracking ships fitted onto a Maverick E body and warhead. So this wouldn't be your standard Maverick, and it would be much better at tracking ships than anything else. It also had some naval mines that it could carry as well. The Chinese would get another reconnaissance vehicle, the RF-84F-36RE, obviously the Thunder Flash. This was the Republic RF-84F, being a reconnaissance fighter variant of the F-84F Thunderstreak. The introduction of the F-86 into the USAF sent Republic scrambling to match the Saber's performance, and they created a pair of swept-wing prototypes using the basis of the F-84E Thunderjet. The wing was swept back at a 38.5 degree angle and would receive the Wright J65 turbojet engine, producing 2,300 pounds of force, more thrust than compared to the F-84E. The second prototype had its intakes relocated to the wing roots rather than the nose. However, this led to a reduction in performance. This second prototype became ideal for a reconnaissance aircraft, as the nose could now house various camera equipment for the role. The ANM-3 machine guns were reduced to 4 guns and located near the intakes of the wing roots. This was the sole armament capability of the RF-84F and was accepted into service in 1953. Between 55 and 58, The US government supplied 25 RF-84Fs to serve in the recon role alongside the RF-86F and the RT-33As, while the RF-84Fs being the sole armed recon jet. In total, 5 J65W3 powered RF-84F-10s and 20 of the more powerful J65W7 powered RF-84Fs were operated by the ROCAF. The RF-84F Thunder flashes through extremely dangerous missions, penetrating into mainland China to collect information on the communist Chinese strengths. The danger couldn't be any more clear when, during a mission on the 15th of April 1957, 2 RF-84Fs, pilots by Major Chen Huai and Captain Wang Zhaozhang, flying a mission over Shanghai, were intercepted by a pair of PLAAF J-5s. The 2 pairs of aircraft engaged in a series of maneuvers, and 1 J-5 overshot in front of Major Chen Huai's nose, upon which he pulled the trigger. Unfortunately for Major Chen Huai, nothing happened, and in the heat of the moment, he forgot to switch the trigger from his camera system to his guns. Despite the error, the 2 RF-84Fs managed to escape, however low on fuel. They opted to make emergency landings in South Korea. While Major Chen Huai actually landed safely, Captain Wang Zhaoqing's own aircraft ran out of fuel during landing and fatally crashed. On the 17th of June 1958, another pair of the recon planes from the 12th Squadron 6th Reconnaissance Wing were performing a mission near the Huayu Mountains. Element Lead was piloted by Major Yang Shiju and his wingman Captain Jin Mao on his right wing about 1,000 meters behind. The 2 RF-84Fs were engaged by 2 PLAAF Mig-15 Bisses with tracers flying right past Major Yang Shiju. In an attempt to get away, the Thunder Flashes dove into the canyon, surrounded by sheer cliff face on both sides. The 2 aircraft flew only a couple hundred feet above the ground at speeds of 900 kilometers an hour, twisting and turning as the MiGs shadowed them from above. With the sun near setting, it shone light between the mountains, making it difficult as the 2 RF-84Fs forcing him to go vertical, which gave the MiGs a short distance to engage. Captain Jin Mao likely rolled inverted as he passed over the cliff top and nosed down into the next canyon just as the MiG's tracer round hit the cliff top as he passed a moment ago. Major Yang Shiju spotted another cliff face directly in front of Captain Jin Mao and called out to pay attention to the front. Unfortunately, it was too late, and Captain Jin Mao and his RF-84F slammed into the cliffside. Yang Shiju was able to successfully flee the PLAAF, but the loss of Captain Jin Mao was proof at just how dangerous the missions were. During the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis between August and September of 1958, the 12th Squadron 6th Reconnaissance Wing undertook all recon missions, and its aircraft performed 269 sorties in a span of just over 4 weeks. 4 of these missions involved dogfights with the PLAAF fighters over mainland China. Later, unarmed RF-100s and RF-101s were introduced into ROCAF service in 1959 and 61. The Thunder Flash would continue flying missions into mainland China until they were completely phased out in 1964 and the aircraft were returned to the US. The Italians get the Macchi C205N1. This was a fighter designed by Mario Castaldi during the Second World War, of which only 1 prototype was built. It was a project with which the engineer Castaldi intended to participate in the competition of the Italian Air Force for Series 5 fighters, and in February of 1942, the German Daimler-Benz engine became available in Italy, the DB605A, with 1,475 horsepower at its takeoff. This engine, of which Fiat acquired the construction license as RA1050 RC58, had been chosen by the military authorities to upgrade a new generation of fighters, the so-called 5 Series. Macchi, similarly to Fiat and Reggiani, which would have produced the G55 and the Reggiani 2005 respectively, set the project for a new fighter plane, destined to receive the new engine, characterized by a wider opening wing and surface compared to that of the previous projects, to overcome maneuverability problems at altitudes around 6,000–7,000 meters. Since, however, the construction times of the new fighter were expected to be rather long, and in any case lagging behind those of Fiat and Reggiani, Macchi proposed to the Ministry of the Air Force to adapt the German engine to the cell of the MC202, with a few detailed modifications, obtaining the Macchi C205V, which was immediately put into production. Macchi, in parallel at the start of the production of the C205V, however, the study of the new aircraft continued, which registered with the military serial number 499 and baptized Orion from the name of the constellation, similarly to the other aircraft of the Series 5. It flew for the first time on the 1st of September 1942 from the fields of Lanate Pozzolo, piloted by Guido Carastiato. The new fighter reached a top speed of 629 kilometers an hour at 7,000 meters altitude, with a tangent height of 11,500 meters and an ascent time of 8,000 meters in 9 minutes 25 seconds. Macchi C205N1 armament was also pretty noteworthy. It had one 20mm Mauser MG-114 with 400 rounds mounted in the fuselage and firing through the follow hub of the propeller, and four 12.7mm Breda Safat machine guns, of which two mounted above the fuselage side by side with 400 rounds per barrel, and two more in the root parts of the wing with 300 rounds per barrel. The specimen was then transferred to Guidonia for military assessment tests, and overall didn't really go too far anywhere, the specific N11, but it is a beautiful aircraft, and I do really enjoy Italian propeller planes. France gets the Arsenal VG90, and it follows a lot of weird and wonderful vehicles when it comes to France, of just being a weird prototype with a very dodgy setup. It was supposed to be a multi-purpose fighter developed by the French company L'Arsenal. After the war, the French Navy announced that they wanted a creation of a deck-based jet fighter. The company took part in it with the VG90 aircraft, and its rivals were the SNCAC NC-1080 deck fighter, which sounds like a graphics card, and the Nord N2200 multi-role fighter. The aircraft was equipped with a turbojet engine, a Rolls-Royce NEN 102, with a draft of 2270 kgs, which was manufactured by Hispano-Suiza. During the development, the technologies used in the production of the VG70 and the VG80 aircraft were used. The first flight of the aircraft took place on the 27th of September 1949, and on the 10th of April 1950, the aircraft was tested for the aircraft carrier the Bretigny. On the 25th of May of the same year, the plane crashed in an accident. The second copy of the VG90 went on trial in August of 51, and on February the 21st of 1952, it was also destroyed in an accident. And after that, the program of the VG90 fighter was discontinued. The design of the aircraft was a free-running monoplane of a normal aerodynamic scheme. The fuselage was monocoque, oval section, and in the bow was planned to place an armament compartment with two 20mm and two 7.7 machine guns. But as usual, when it comes to these aircraft, there was actually no armaments on them because they didn't have any. So we're going off planned armaments at this point. There was also an REO compartment and a niche under the bow support of the chassis. The lantern of the cockpit of the pilot consisted of a fixed visor and a backward flap, and also a bunch of other design features. So basically what you have here is a metal tube with the Hispano-Suiza in it, the Hispano-Suiza built Rolls-Royce NEN. It was able to go 920 kilometers per hour. It did not have an armament, but it was proposed on the first one to have 320mm and two 500 kilo bombs. But obviously these were never fitted because it crashed. And then on the second one, It was supposed to have two 20mm Spanosusas and two 77mm machine guns, and also some rockets, but once again, these weren't fitted because it crashed. So yeah, a very sad story for the VG-90. The Israelis get the Bristol Beaufighter TF Mk as a vehicle to have a look at. We'll talk about how they actually got this vehicle. The story of how Beaufighters made it into service with the Israeli Air Force is not a simple one by any means. It is in fact one of the craziest ones, which really says a lot considering how many aircraft made their way into the 1948 war in unorthodox ways. From the very beginning, even before the war, the Israelis knew they needed to acquire aircraft capable of bombing and preferably ones that can operate in medium ranges. Initially, the Israelis tried to acquire A-20s and B-25s in America, however those attempts were unsuccessful. Despite this, the agents sent to get the aircraft for the Air Force were tenacious and did everything they possibly could to get their hands on combat aircraft. The Israelis couldn't be picky and have made various attempts all over the world, including in Europe, which is where the story of the Beaufighters took place. The agent who was responsible for the acquisition of aircraft in Europe was a man named Emanuel Zur, and consequently he had also found himself seeking combat aircraft in Britain, which was not particularly friendly country to the Israelis at the time. Emanuel Zur ended up scouring various ex-RAF fields in an attempt to find useful machines. During one of these attempts, Zur had managed to get word regarding several combat aircraft, finding out that a company purchased several Bristol Beaufighters from the RAF excess in Ringway near Blackpool. Emmanuel contacted the company, who let him take a look at the aircraft, and he found 6 aircraft with the civil registrations GAJMB through GAJMG, which were devoid of all armaments or essential flight systems, and had also learned that their engines were not well maintained since they were removed from service. It was arranged that the aircraft would be sold and overhauled for a sum of £9,000, a process in which aircraft GAMF was cannibalized for the overhaul. This only left the issue of getting the aircraft out of Britain despite the embargo. The Israelis managed to send the 20mm cannons, ammo, and spare parts using a Halifax bomber, which was converted into a civilian transport aircraft. The Halifax made it to Ekron Air Base in Israel. However, it suffered severe damage during the landing, which dashed the hopes of the Israelis to convert that plane back into a bomber, though the cargo was thankfully intact. The problem of getting the Beaufighters themselves out of Britain was significantly harder, since the British authorities would not allow combat aircraft to get out of the country again after what happened with the Halifax. In order to get the Beaufighters out, a cover was made using the guise of making a film about the activities of the Royal New Zealand Air Force pilots during World War II. During the early test flights prior to the filming, the Beaufighter registered as GAJME crashed, killing the former RAF pilot Michael Campbell and destroying the aircraft. The filming itself was conducted masterfully to trick the British to think it was an actual movie filming and not a facade. Several flights were conducted where the planes came back to the airfield as intended to ease the nerves of the authorities. Only Emmanuel and the pilots were in on the real intention of these so-called filmings. During the 4th takeoff, for the sake of the film, the planes took off normally, just as the previous 2 takeoffs had been. Despite this, the aircraft did not return to land this time. Instead, they kept flying south out of Britain towards the Mediterranean Sea. A flight path was planned in advance, which would take them from Britain to Corsican, then to Yugoslavia, and finally to Israel. By the time the British authorities found out what happened, the 4 remaining Beaufighters with the civil registrations from B, C, D, and G were already in the hands of the Israelis. Infuriated by the aircraft smuggling, the British revoked the citizenship of John Harvey, one of the Beaufighter pilots who was the leader of the flight out of the country. And then, during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, they were obviously used. The 4 Beaufighters made the trip to Israel, were given to 103 Squadron's B flight, where they were led by Len Fitchett, and there's a ton of information about generally what they had. They used 420mm Spanos. They obviously used the Bristol Hercules Mark 16 engines, which had 1670 horsepower each. And then also, additionally, there's an unconfirmed bomb load which could be carried, according to two different versions. So either something like 430 kilos on the bombs with two 250s under the fuselage, or 470 kilo bombs with two 160 kilos under the fuselage. The last vehicle is of Finnish descent, but it's actually of Soviet descent. This is the Mig-21MGBT MG-114. This is a Finnish recon prototype plane, which is based off of the Mig-21 BIS. It would have the normal Mig-21 BIS loadouts, but also have access to a bunch of countermeasures, such as chaff, flares, active ECM, and also an RWR on the machine as well. Since it was a recon aircraft, it could also get access to a camera pod, which would be kind of interesting. And then, if we have a look at the Mig-21MGBT, it was the first prototype of the MGBT variant, the MG-114. It started life as a Mig-21 BIS, built before in 1978 in the Soviet Union. Gorky, nowadays, the Sokol plant. The MG-114 arrived in Finland in 1978, and from there it served in the Finnish Air Force, where the modification program started in 1986. So basically this would be a 1986 variant of the Mig-21 BIS. They changed its cockpit, and they also changed some of its additional things, but it would basically be very similar to a Mig-21 BIS. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Nicholas Richardson, Elove Goat, Pyman675, Winter Scientist, Merciless Reaper, Jerry Prevolt, Megadino King, Orange Tail, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Uncle Bean, Sem Arslan, Derek R., Bareen, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.